All right, everyone, good morning, good morning, good morning. We are excited to be back in Little Rock. I hope you didn't stay out too late last night. Where's the mayor of Little Rock? Oh, there he is. I wanted to make sure you didn't stay out too late last night.
I left the Michael Nutter.
For the record, I did not call out the mayor of Philadelphia. You guys did.
The mayor of New Orleans ought to know how to party too. Look, he's not here either.
All right. So again, I hope everyone,
I saw both of them outside.
they're on their way in.
Just tell everybody I said that I'm covering their ass.
Our CEO said he said he saw them both outside. He thinks. All right. Again, Mayor, thank you so much for an unbelievable day and a half, 2 days here, and beautiful. Give Mayor Sadola another round of applause. So this morning's first session examines how community policing strategies can have an impact on two societal problems that most law enforcement agencies must confront on a daily basis: domestic violence and human trafficking. As we all know, these are problems that weaken our families and our neighborhoods. The issue of domestic violence has been getting a lot of front-page headline visibility lately, and we hope that, as a result of this, that we can make some progress in helping people, mostly men, understand the impact of their behavior and the fact that they will face consequences for those actions. Our discussion is being led by mayors and police executives of two major cities, Houston and Salt Lake City. Mayor Parker is in her third two-year term as Houston's mayor. Prior to her election as mayor, she served for 6 years as a city council member and 6 years as a city controller. She's the only person in the history of Houston to hold the offices of council member, controller, and mayor. Her accomplishments in office are impressive and have not gone unnoticed. For example, Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. She's also a chair of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Criminal and Social Justice Committee. Let's give a round of applause for Mayor Parker. And then we have with us Martha Montalvo.
There you go.
Whew, it's early. Executive Assistant and Chief of Staff to the Houston Police Department. During her 34 years with the department, she has risen through the ranks and has been Executive Assistant Chief for 10 years. In this position, she heads a command that includes all of the department's administration, ranges from internal affairs, inspector general, human resources, training, psychological services, and crime analysis. Let's give a round of applause for Martha. All right, to my left, Salt Lake City in the house, Mayor Becker. Mayor Becker was elected in 2008. He spent 11 years prior to that in the Utah House of Representatives, 5 of those as minority leader. He is a champion of transparency in government and has created new opportunities for his city residents to engage in local government and get involved in the decision-making process. Mayor Becker is recognized for his advocacy in social justice issues. He was elected to a second term in 2011, garnering 75% of the vote. Round of applause for Mayor Becker. What happened to the 25% who didn't vote for you?
There was an opponent.
There was an opponent?
Yeah.
That got 25%?
I can't compete with you.
So I got 50 plus 1. He's way ahead of me. All right, and then we have Chief Burbank. He was in Sacramento a couple weeks ago, and a lot of you remember that, and did a great job out in Sacramento. He's been with the Salt Lake City Police Department since 1991, has been chief of the department since March of 2006, has distinguished himself through his work in difficult problems such as police responsibility for immigration enforcement and racial profiling and other civil rights issues. He has garnered many honors for his leadership in these areas. In 2011, for example, the Salt Lake City Tribune named him, how do you say Utah of the Year, for his willingness to endure threats and criticism over his positions on immigration and enforcement. Let's give a round of applause for Chief Burbank. All right, so we'll start off with Mayor Parker, and then we'll go to Mayor Becker, and then we'll go to their respective law enforcement officers, and then we'll open it up to questions. Mayor Parker?
We're going to be talking this morning about both domestic violence and human trafficking, and I'm going to make most of my remarks about the issue of human trafficking, although obviously domestic violence is a significant issue and is on the public conscience right now. But Houston has been recognized, unfortunately, as one of the major hubs for human trafficking here in the United States. Part of that is that we're a major urban area. Part of it is that we are a very, very large port. And part of it is that we are in a border state. And that has all converged to drive up our human trafficking numbers. We are also one of the most international of U.S. cities. 1 in 5 Houstonians is foreign-born. And a lot of those folks come legitimately and for jobs, and unfortunately, a significant number of them are brought in illicitly. I know that all the law enforcement folks in here will know this, but I want to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page in terms of terms. Human smuggling and human trafficking are very different things. Human smuggling is you pay somebody to bring you across the border. You pay them, they take you across, you get to the other side, and you go on your way, and they go on their way. Human trafficking is when you bring somebody in and you either you take their money and essentially kidnap them, or you lure them in some way, and then you keep them in literally slavery or servitude, or somehow unable to act on their own. And we have to, in this country, come to a consensus about calling human trafficking what it is, and calling out things that we don't necessarily lump under the term human trafficking, and begin to raise public awareness about it. We have domestic human trafficking, which tends to be the sex trade, which could be one pimp working a girl or a couple of girls, or organized rings around moving prostitutes in and out of the major cities. And then we have international human trafficking, which can be the sex trade, but is also can be labor. Nannies, housekeepers, even semi-skilled groups of laborers coming in to do construction or other things, but then they're confined to a camp. Maybe their passports are taken. They're not allowed to circulate freely again. Those are victims of human trafficking. In Houston, a lot of the women who are trafficked end up chained in, and I use that word deliberately, chained in brothels, in cantinas, but we have a proliferation of modeling studios, massage parlors, that you can get a really good massage in Houston, but I would hesitate to send you into anything that says Thai massage on the outside in the city of Houston if you just want a massage. But nail salons as well. A lot of Vietnamese and Korean women brought into Houston, and they work in those types of personal care places. And the problem is, the public doesn't see it, and when they see it, they don't recognize it. If you talk about street corner prostitution, oh yes, everybody knows what that is, but no one thinks of it as human trafficking. And if you talk about the other side, the international side of human trafficking, people don't connect to that. One of the most important things we can do, just as we do with domestic violence, is make sure that everybody understands what's happening, how to identify it, what to do if you see it, and that there is a coordinated police response. About a year and a half ago, actually more than, I guess 2 years ago now, because of the increased problems with human trafficking, and we had made some very effective busts and freed women from brothels in cantinas in Houston, I decided to create a human trafficking task force from the public. And I guess I made a little bit of a tactical error. I tried to figure out everybody who was working in the space of human trafficking, not on the law enforcement side, because we had good law enforcement coordination, but on the public side. And I identified as many different organizations as I can that said that they were either providing services or intervention, try to put them in a room together. And then I discovered that there were dozens more. Every church in Houston has decided that they are somehow doing something for human trafficking, and they all got in and they all started competing for attention, and hopefully, I guess, that we were going to fund them somehow. So then I had to kind of calm everybody back down on that.
Yes.
Yes, funding. And work with them to understand. There's a lot of well-meaning folks, and the problem is that for a lot of the domestic human trafficking, and it's primarily young women, obviously not entirely, but they don't believe that they're in trouble. They don't believe they have a problem. My pimp loves me, or the ring is taking care of me, they give me what I need, and you can separate them from the situation, but they go right back. And a lot of the organizations on the public side that want to intervene don't understand the psychological dynamics of the women in the situation. On the other hand, when you're dealing with international human trafficking, there is a fear that they're going to be deported, the fear that there's language barriers, there's my family back in El Salvador is going to be killed if I don't continue to do this. And so these are not, hey, we're going to rush in and we're going to rescue people and they're going to be happy that we've rescued them. And a lot of the organizations just didn't understand that. So we launched a public awareness campaign in Houston a year ago with, we did a mass public event, heavy coverage of the media, live broadcast. Actually, on the steps of City Hall, we had victims of domestic trafficking from across the various trafficked groups. We had some of the organizations and agencies that are most focused on it come. A lot of awareness. We billboards across the city of Houston, and Tip Line. There is a national organization that does human trafficking, takes in human trafficking tips on a hotline. We spread that all across the city. Just earlier this year, the state of Texas adopted our program. Governor came down. We had another big public media event, exposure. We're trying to do it in all the major cities of Texas, just to say, how do you identify human trafficking? What does it look like? It's not what you think it is. It's often hidden, and we need the eyes and ears of the public to help us do the right thing and then turn the information over to law enforcement. But, and this is what I'm going to really want to talk about. How do you fund your human trafficking efforts? And we did something which I think is pretty amazing in Houston last year, and that is we had been in litigation with topless clubs in Houston for about 20 years. We have a really stupid ordinance. I can say that because I didn't write it. We had a really stupid ordinance that applied to topless clubs, and we had been tasked with defending it, and we'd been litigating it for, as I said, more than 20 years. And it had stuff in it about how close the dancers could be to the patrons, and the dancers had to wear ID. I don't know whether they were supposed to clip it to their pasties or their G-strings, but just... And it seemed to be the most popular assignment in Vice, is to go into these topless clubs and determine how, how far away the dancers were from the patrons. And I have always hated that ordinance. And, but I was dutifully trying to enforce it. And my city attorney and I had an epiphany at one point. We looked at each other and said, why are we fighting these guys? They could be a tool to help us stop human trafficking, because we know that a lot of the girls who work in the topless clubs are rotated through the topless clubs around the United States. And they want to end this litigation. Let's see if we can go cut a deal. And we did. We ended these decades of litigation. The topless clubs in Houston, there were 16 topless clubs that were part of the litigation. They are now ponying up $1 million a year for the next 6 years to fund a special human trafficking task force for the city of Houston. Everybody in Houston who thinks I'm going to hell thinks I'm the devil incarnate now. But I had a press conference with owners of these topless clubs, and they agreed to not only fund our human trafficking unit, but that they took down all of the private rooms in their clubs so that to make it more difficult for prostitution to occur in their clubs. They also agreed to open their employment records and to not hire women into the clubs that were represented by managers or that were rotated from city to city. That it's all about local employment. We have plenty of pretty girls in Houston. They want to hire those girls. They can do that. We also and a number of other things that they agreed to do as well. And so now we have a focused, specialized human trafficking unit that works closely with with federal agencies and with other law enforcement agencies to crack down in Houston. And then I'll pause there, and if you have any questions about how much fun was doing that agreement, I'm happy to talk about it. So
Best practice.
it's best practice, sort of. Doesn't work for everybody, but.
Thanks, Mayor. So what we'll do is we're going to hear from Martha. So we'll go Houston, Houston, Salt Lake, and then we'll open it up to questions. So Martha.
Good morning, and thank you again for letting me be part of this conference. As the mayor stated, the Human Trafficking Unit, I was one of those naysayers, and I've completely turned around in my perspective in terms of how successful this program is. So I believe in giving kudos when kudos are due, and I think the mayor, it was a brilliant idea. The unit started in March of this year, and since March of this year, the unit consists of a lieutenant, a sergeant, 9 officers, and 2 civilian analysts. Since March of this year, we've had 69 charges with 52 arrests. And part of what I really like about this this agreement is some of this money goes toward training of all employees, especially the dancers. They have to get training and watch videos of human trafficking and things that they can do to resolve those issues. In terms of domestic violence, there's a lot of things that we've done in that arena. We've talked yesterday a whole lot about relationships. We're very fortunate that we have established solid relationships with various entities throughout the city. They include the hospital districts, Adult Protective Service, Children's Protective Service, Aids to Victim of Domestic Abuse, the Montrose Counseling Center, the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, and of course, the Harris County District Attorney's Office. Yesterday, we also talked a bit about the media. Several years ago, the department did a massive media campaign educating our community about domestic violence. We had billboards, public service announcement, information fairs, but the most important thing we did is we publicized and had the media come with us to serve domestic violence warrants. We feel that we got the message across and also put out information that assisted many victims. As in human trafficking, a few years back, we decided that we needed to place more attention on this problem. So a special victims unit was created. It's about 60+ officers. They're dedicated solely to domestic violence as well as sexual assault victims. We're also fortunate to have with this unit 11 crisis counselors. So while we do our investigative aspect of attending to these victims, on the other side of that, we felt that they needed attention in terms of their mental health. In addition to that, we have about 61 officers throughout the city. They are not attached to the call for service loop. We refer to them as investigative first responders. What these officers do is they respond to calls that have a high probability resolvability clearance opportunities. Domestic violence cases falls in that arena. So for this year alone, we've handled, or this group has handled, over 700 of these domestic violence cases. And because victim participation, as we all know, is low on these type of cases, we emphasized training not only for our investigators, but also for the first responders, the street officers, on evidence-based investigations. We put an emphasis on photographs, witness statements, 9/11 tapes, such as these types of evidence that are important because by gathering these, we don't have to rely on the victim's cooperation, which, as we know, on many cases does not come. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Martha. Salt Lake City, Mayor Becker, you're up.
Well, thank you for having Chief Burbank and I with you today, and for this meeting. I've got to say that every time I have a chance, and this meeting is certainly a reflection of that in as the 10th degree, to get together with our other mayors, and in this case with police chiefs, and see what you all are doing around the country. It is incredibly inspiring. So I thank you, Tom and President Johnson, for inviting us to participate here and learn from all of you and get inspired by all of you and the work that we try to do every day. You know, the work we do as elected officials, as mayors, I think tends to fall into three general categories. There are things that we aspire for our city that are new and require some change. There are the things we react to every day. Some of them are crises that occupy all of our attention for the moment, and a lot of them are just the ongoing business of the city that are, you know, require our attention and some decisions and direction, or at least recommendations. And then there's ongoing work that is just happening, and happening well in the city, that seems to work smoothly. And so we're grateful for that, those of us in elective office, because we've got good people working for us, and it allows us to do the other things that we need to do in our jobs. And when it comes to our law enforcement arena and social justice arena in Salt Lake City, most of what my attention is driven by, it falls into that more routine work. And it's because we have such superb people in the city, led by Chief Burbank as our police chief, in that area. And so while I'm going to talk briefly about community domestic violence and human trafficking, I've got to say that for me, as mayor in my almost 7 years now, those have been issues that I've been following, but I haven't been very directly involved in. So I'm going to keep my remarks very short and let Chief Burbank, who's the star of our city anyway, talk about how we're addressing these issues. Domestic violence is, as we all know, just a huge issue in our communities and across society. In part of my sordid past, I was a law enforcement officer for a brief period of time, and I remember going through the training, and I was instructed that the two most dangerous times for a law enforcement officer are traffic stops and domestic violence situations. And I quickly learned and felt that was true. We all understand why, who've been around that arena, because there's just so much uncertainty. There's so many wild cards at play that it's difficult to protect yourself and others. In Salt Lake and in Utah in general, we have as much of a domestic violence problem as anywhere. And like in most places, a lot of it is swept under the rug too often. And it's particularly true in a culture, I think, like we have in Utah, where we like to paint such a pretty picture of our world and lives. And we see that in other arenas as well. But I've got to give enormous credit to our community. In the case of domestic violence, this is a place where members of our community have stepped up privately and publicly and invested enormously to provide the sheltering and the refuge and the support systems around victims of domestic violence. We have, and I know Chief Burbank's going to talk about this in some detail here, we have family justice centers. We have great cooperation among all of our, in our social justice arena, both law enforcement and prosecution and protection through social services. We seem to have, from my vantage point, great coordination and support in place. Now, there's no question in my mind that we still have an enormous problem of folks, as is true around the country, with domestic violence and people who are caught in the trap of domestic violence and for a whole variety of reasons don't come forward. And that's part of our challenge, I think, to keep the issue in the forefront of the public and to make sure people know that they have safe places to make contact with those of us who are in a position to provide help. And I view that as kind of a big part of my role, and so I've participated in a number of events and activities to try to support the work we're doing. As I said, I'm going to let Chief Burbank talk about that. Human trafficking is an issue that is so far below the radar for most of us, I think, in our communities. And I really appreciate Mayor Parker, you and Martha talking about what you've done in Houston, because I think it gives us some really good ideas to bring back to Salt Lake. But it's an issue that the chief has made me aware of, but is pretty much, I would say, invisible in our community in terms of a heightened awareness and appreciation for what we need to do to address it. I know that much of it revolves around prostitution, and it's maybe the invisible side or more invisible side of prostitution. And I can only say that I'm inspired by what I've been hearing today and learn to take it on better. So I'll turn time over now to Chief Burbank. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We saw an interesting dynamic that took place over the last little while, and this is the Ray Rice incident, and I'm certainly not here to further condemn that individual. But the thing that I found most interesting is the fact of the outrage that this occurred. Well, this occurs every day in our city, and the fact is it was probably not Ray Rice's first time committing an act like that, and it certainly wasn't the first time that he engaged in intimidating or manipulative behavior with an individual, and probably with different young women during his lifetime. Because what we see time and time again statistically is we have individuals who start not with the left hook to the face, but actually start with very simple, manipulative, coercive behavior, oftentimes associated with money, oftentimes associated with access and the children. And that's where domestic violence begins. And the challenge with that we have in law enforcement is because if someone were to call and say, my husband is being a little manipulative tonight, what would your dispatch center tell that person, right? Would we actually send a police officer out? And chances are pretty good, probably not. And then if we did send a police officer out, how sympathetic would they be, and what avenues would they have to resolve the situation? As we spoke at the conference in Sacramento, I mean, our goal is to prevent crime from occurring. That's all we should be the measure, is What crime do we not have because of the good work that we do, and to eliminate that from society? So one of the things that we've done in Salt Lake City that I'm really most proud of, and I'll be right up front, it is certainly not our idea in policing, and I'm sure there's no difference in running a city. You steal all the good ideas when you come to a meeting like this. You incorporate all the good parts of it, you throw out the bad parts and say, this is what my new model is, and you get lots of credit for it. But it actually is one that we share around, and that is a Family Justice Center model. My commitment to the Family Justice Center, and this is, I'll explain a little bit, those of you who don't know, we took our entire detective staff, those responsible for investigating domestic violence, our victim advocates, moved them out of the police department and put them in the YWCA, who built a brand new building simply for the Family Justice Center to exist. So now an individual who is involved in a domestic violence situation has a place that they can go in which they receive police services. The district attorney's office is in this location. Victim advocates are in this location. The YWCA for shelter for them. They actually have a place for the children as well to go, daycare services, and they can receive a medical exam in the event that it's a rape situation. It is a one-stop location. And so you understand what used to take place in Salt Lake City, we would send an officer out in the middle of the night on a domestic violence situation. The officers would say, here you go, here's a case number. Oftentimes, because of laws mandating arrests, somebody would go to jail that night. Follow up at some point in the future with the detective, the YWCA, the district attorney's office. They'd walk in for an interview with our detectives into the police department, which had a lot of stigma attached to it, especially the ugly old building that we used to live in. It was like going into prison in order to conduct an interview there. And then we would say, well, that's great, but now you need to go to the district attorney's office, repeat your statement, and make sure that they understand what's going on. And, oh, yeah, by the way, they're blocks and blocks away, and you need to get down to that location. What are they doing with the kids during this time? Who knows? Because we really didn't have a good location for the children to be in the police department. The district attorney would be there, and then we'd say, well, oh, yeah, you want some advocacy. Well, the YWCA is over here, and that's another location that you need to stop by. And so we had a vicious circle and a cycle that took place that we lost victims. And that is a terrible thing to say, but we actually lost victims. And when you talk about the reluctance of victims to prosecute, some of that is certainly because of the situation and circumstances that they are living in. There is no question that how is the rent going to get paid, where are my children going to be tomorrow night, comes into play in some of these circumstances. But also when we lose victims because the process is so cumbersome and not very helpful, that is completely on us. And there is a better model. The nice thing about the Family Justice Center is not only in extreme cases where you have physical violence that has occurred, you actually have the opportunity that you can constantly refer people. Those situations where people just want to have a conversation with somebody and say, this is what I'm experiencing, before it becomes a domestic violence incident that we actually have to respond to and becomes another statistic on the sheet. They can go in and have some counseling away from the location. Your officers, if they know the family justice system model, can constantly refer people into that as they encounter them that don't rise to somebody going to jail tonight, that don't rise removing children from the home and all the dramatic things that potentially can take place when a police officer responds. But they can actually refer them into this situation, and we can start to stop that cycle of violence that usually, and quite frankly, more often than not, becomes more violent as the days and weeks progress. Right? It is not something that begins and ends with just verbal abuse. It extends far beyond that, especially if it's allowed to go unchecked. This is a problem that exists in our society. This is when you look in the NFL saying, oh, we've got a problem. Well, yeah, the NFL's got a problem. Police departments have a problem with this. Cities have a problem with this. There is no person or family in society that is not potentially subject to this. If you look in your own families, and I certainly won't ask the question, many of you will have family members somewhere along the way that are victims of some form of domestic violence or abuse. It is something that we need to do a better job before it becomes, because again, we simplify it down to the point that we say, okay, if you actually hit somebody, well, yeah, we've got all kinds of laws in place and mandate, you go to jail, and this is how much time, and we separate you, and there's no contact agreements, and all those different things that are very effective. I'm not minimizing any of those. But we need to do a better job before it gets to that point, and it becomes so severe that that's what happened. Some of the things at the Family Justice Center, counseling, right? Family counseling. referrals from the district attorney's office, especially on first-time offenses, for not just fines and jail time for perpetrators, but actual counseling that comes along with that. That if you don't follow through, then there's a stiffer penalty that is associated with that. Taking children out of the situation, especially those who have experienced domestic violence firsthand or witnessed it, actually taking them to a center where they're sympathetic to their needs, not a police interview room, but one that specializes in interviewing children. Those are the types of things that build better cases, but also help solve the problem before it becomes an issue for the police, which is always, again, our goal. I will switch topics a little bit and move into human trafficking. How many of you have human trafficking in your city? And I won't ask you again to raise your hand because it's one of those, but if you have prostitution, you have human trafficking. The mayor referred to some cases that, so in Salt Lake City, now again, this is Salt Lake City, Utah, we had 125 incidents of human trafficking that we made 95 arrests and all convictions on those arrests. I mean, they were actually pretty good cases. It used to be that Salt Lake City had a vice squad a number of years ago, and we would spend most of our time going into massage parlors and seeing if we were touched inappropriately. In fact, it had gotten so bad that the district attorney's expectation in order to prosecute is that there had to be something overt, not just an agreement to engage in prostitution, but there had to be some physical contact, touching, or anything else taking place to where you had police officers who were being groped, touched, or exposing themselves. And when I heard about this, and when you consider the number of underage females especially engaging in prostitution or the demand for that, and you potentially have a police officer who is sexually assaulting a minor in order to make a Class B misdemeanor arrest is ridiculous. Again, you see people walking down the street. Someone calls in and says, we have prostitutes. We show up, we make an arrest for a Class B misdemeanor because they look the part, they made an arrangement. We send them to jail in Salt Lake City. They spend about 2 hours in our county jail, and then they're back out on the street, and we haven't solved the problem. In fact, we haven't done anything to even impact that problem. Just a little inconvenience for a moment. What you find in prostitution, how many young people are out there saying, I want to be a prostitute when I grow up? Does not take place. In fact, most of these people, what you find, if you take the time to ask the question, is there is somebody making money and profiting from their position. We need to start thinking about human trafficking in very subtle terms. It is certainly the dramatic cases that exist, especially in Houston and some areas of our country that are close to the border where we do have people who are trafficked in large numbers. But we have people in our cities every single day that are forced into a lifestyle because they either have drug and alcohol addictions, end up owing money to individuals, or are actually brought into this country illegally, undocumented, and the threat of deportation or the threat to their family is what causes them to be put in this situation, and you have individuals who are profiting from this. So as we made the change in our vice unit, we went away from just simply making arrests. In fact, that is not enough. We use our interactions with those people who are engaged in prostitution-type activities, who are engaged in some of the massage parlors, to ask the question, who is making money from this? And we have put together some significant cases that go upstream, in some cases, 2 and 3 levels to individuals who are engaged in profiting from these people, the actual traffickers of humans in our society. And that's where our focus should always be. Again, to stop the issue, to end the problem. We had a conversation earlier. The notion of us stopping drug and alcohol abuse or prostitution, right, it's gone on in our society since forever, right? We are certainly not going to impact it on the back end of that. But we can, if we stem the demand, if we start focusing on those people who are profiting, those people who are engaging or soliciting. We have, and it's a sad commentary on our society, and I think it exists in every single city. If one of my detectives, and I just got a report the other day, if one of my detectives went online, posed as a 14-year-old, and had 53 hits within the first 53 minutes. I mean, it was outrageous, the number of people who wanted to meet and to hook up. That resulted in a lot of arrests, and simply because they said, I'm a 14-year-old female. One of the things that is most underreported is those that involve gay and lesbian interactions, both in domestic violence and in trafficking situation and prostitution situations. You have people who are being abused and severely beaten, and because of their sexual preference and the stigma that comes with coming forward and saying, yes, this is what happened to me. We need to, again, create avenues that our police departments, that our cities are more open and receptive to this. And oftentimes, the police department is not the best avenue. And so we should look for partners such as the YWCA, such as Health and Human Services, those agencies that can engage some of these people in a non-enforcement activity where we can play a supportive role. We should demand the participation of these people, but we should not demand to be in charge. We should allow some of them to drive, and then those victims will be better victims for us when we go to prosecution, when we engage in things, and we actually start to stem the tide and solve the problems before they become huge issues for our city. So with that, I think we'll take some questions.
Yeah, Mayor Parker.
Follow on to Chief Burbank, and I want to be clear. I think you made an excellent point. We're not interested in arresting a bunch of prostitutes. We can arrest prostitutes fairly easily, and we pick them up for loitering in the roadway or disrupting traffic, and we want to arrest traffickers. The other is that we have that coordinated model, the co-located agencies, the DA, the PD, counseling for, we have a specialized location for child abuse victims. You do it for domestic violence. We have a very best-in-class facility for child abuse victims that we'd love to show off to folks and see more of that, where you put every agency in the same place, and so it makes it easy for the victim to come forward. I just want to throw those two things in. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Mayor. So at this point, we have a few minutes for questions. We'd love to hear some questions for our panelists. We'll start with Mayor Salinas.
Located right on the border, and when you speak of domestic violence, one of the fears of the victims is the fear of being deported if they report those incidents. And I think that more has to be done to make people aware that, you know, they're victims. And I know some of the church organizations, and I think the chief will agree with me, that they're doing a lot of proactive work in this area. And I don't know what suggestions you can have. I know, obviously, that we also have an issue with domestic help. You know, so it's a complicated issue because we're right on the border. So we try to work with the social organizations and try to make them aware that we need to know, because they're going to be victimized once, they're going to be victimized twice. So we would appreciate your comments.
All right, anybody? Chief Burbank?
This is an issue, and certainly you have a more significant problem than other parts of the country because of the location of your city. But this is why myself, the major city chiefs, we have been so strongly opposed to officers as acting as immigration agents, because it sends the message that, right, we're more concerned about immigration and not the victims of crime, and it creates no avenue for someone to come forth and talk to the police, because then that threat from the perpetrator of these crimes that, oh, I'll call INS and you'll be deported, exactly. Right? I mean, you remember the days. Exactly. That is real. Mm-hmm. Because if the police are acting in that capacity, and so again, that's why it is so important that we don't fall into that trap, that we have avenues created that people who are the victims of crime do not need to worry about that. And the message needs to be sent in our cities, because it is not. And throughout the nation, and interestingly enough, we did some studies in Salt Lake City where it shows that people are less likely to report crime if we are engaged in immigration enforcement behavior. Right? Not surprisingly, those people who are undocumented, but also the citizens, right, of Latino descent. Even our Caucasian citizens in Salt Lake City said, no, we would be less likely to report a crime that was occurring if we thought you were going to come in and deport the family members. And so those are some of the things that we need to be upfront and realize that these are going on. language barriers and some of those other things we need to overcome. And again, do a much better job. How our police department reflects our community and how our capability reflects the needs of our community is very important.
I think one thing that the Mayor, you said, Mayor Barker, that you have to get to the root of the problem, and that is the traffickers, those that are doing the harm to those victims. Thank
If
you.
I may, in Houston, we've been very public with the media, especially Spanish-speaking media, and we work with a lot of organizations, and actually we meet with them on a regular basis, one of them being Catholic Charities, AMA, LULAC. And one of the things we emphasize is that the Houston Department is not immigration. We do not enforce and don't, unless you've committed a crime, we're not interested in your immigration status. We're interested in making sure that if you're a victim of a crime, that you report it, that we follow up, and that we make the necessary arrests. And we have many Spanish-speaking officers that can communicate, and not only Spanish-speaking, we have over 1,000 officers that speak various languages. So we try to get that across, and we're very active in getting that message out. We're not here to enforce immigration.
Mayor, it's also important to remind folks as part of your messaging that if you are a witness to a crime, that you may be able to, or a victim of a crime, you may be able to receive permanent status in the United States, and that cooperating can be beneficial in the long run for you.
All right, next question, comment? Yes, Chief.
To Mayor Parker and Chief Burbank, with your family justice centers, was there any barriers getting people to there to engage, to the location of those centers?
Ours is completely separate from our police agencies. Our Center for Child Abuse Victims is in it's out of the center part of the town. It's easy to get to. It's a bright, welcoming place. And law enforcement across the region knows that if you have a suspected child abuse case, the easiest way to make that case is to convince the family to go there. But they also do long-term follow-up care. The counselors are in the same place. So families know from other families that it's a good, safe place to go. So you can be brought there through the criminal justice process, or a family can spontaneously, as Chief Burbank said on domestic violence, you may decide, hey, we think we have a problem, and it is well enough known across the region that families will go there spontaneously.
Our officers are assigned CPS Assessment Center.
Thank you.
It's called the Children's Assessment Center.
I might just mention, as it relates to our Family Justice Center, kind of emphasizing something. This really came from the community. While we support it, the county DA, district attorney supports it, and others are very, very actively involved. I mean, we've found in our community, my guess is it's true in your community, as Chief Burbank said, domestic violence goes across every realm of society, and so, and every family probably, in one connection or another. And so it was not hard to reach out into our community for fundraising to establish a really first-class facility for the range of domestic violence situations that we encounter, and to really provide the funding for services. It's mostly non-governmental funding that supports the entire center.
Well, and the biggest challenge is getting officers there, not the public, because you're now sending them, different. It becomes a little more touchy-feely for police officers, and so it takes a transition period. But once they decide that this is a better model, once they buy into that model, you start to move forward leaps and bounds, and you are constantly encountering people who are not yet what we would typically classify as victims of domestic violence, right? They haven't experienced that physical abuse. They're entering the system or entering into this prior to that we can maybe do some prevention activities.
All right, another question, comment? All right, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.